everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Kane's independent media production. Today, we are bringing you, on an unusual day, a bonus episode going into exploring producing snare drum sounds around different areas of the kit while using the Zikit system. Now, if you've been keeping up with us, you may have seen the Zikit system in a couple of previous videos that we've done. We've been having a lot of fun experimenting with it. But what you will not have seen is this drum from Reverie Drum Company. It's an 8-ply maple drum. It's extra deep. It's 9 inches deep, standard 14-inch diameter, 8 lugs, has a slightly rounded over batter edge and a sharp bearing edge on the bottom. Just an overall beautiful, warm, round, beefy sounding drum, which is extra exciting for us to experiment with the Zikit system inside, since we haven't really had anything like this before. Now, we're trying something brand new today that we have not done before, bit of an experiment on our end as well. We are going to utilize a backing track today and a subtle amount of mixing to bring this setup into basically the drum sound for this song. And the main thing we need to keep in mind is that we are not retuning this drum in any way. We're utilizing the Zikit system to change the tone, change the timbre, change the pitch overall, and then we're going to move it around the kit to places that feel appropriate for the type of sound that we're getting out of it, depending on that setup, and then comp it all together so that we have multiple drum set sounds and multiple snare sounds for our completed track. Yep, okay, so that was a lot, and We got to get out in front and say that this is by no means the sort of like finished track kind of thing that we would be, sending off as if it's completely done. What we wanted to do today was instead take this song, which by itself is a fairly straightforward piece of music, and see what sort of experimentation and ideas we could find for each of the sections that could ultimately maybe be the thing that we would use. This is something that you have to do a lot in pre-production situations, sometimes also in the recording studio, or if you're just working on tracks at home for yourself. No matter what the scenario, figuring out what you want to do, not just in terms of what you're going to play, but also how it's going to sound and how it's going to integrate into the entire piece of music. The beauty of the Zikit system in this case in particular is that it's very easy to quickly get a different sound regardless of where the drum is placed on the kit, whether you're using it as an auxiliary or a primary or more of a Snom kind of vibe. And in experimenting with that sound, you start to get inspiration for ideas that you would not normally land on if all of the sounds were static. Additionally, we also have the option of turning off the snare wires, and if we wanted to, we could even move through all the Zikit settings with that as well, just to get ideas, to get excited, and to take us away from playing rote stuff that's just in our bodies that we would play without thinking. To get inside the mind of this now, we're going to listen to just this drum raw audio now instead of what we were hearing earlier of the 3 settings that the Zikit provides us, just this snare by itself. The first snare sound that we hear in the track is with the Zikit system disengaged, so just the regular, relatively low tuning of this drum. Let's check out the raw audio of that sound. For the beginning of the track, just listening to the guitar and getting into the kind of energy of it, we wanted something expansive, something broad, something that had a lot of space. So it seemed like we would want to go for the biggest sound that the drum can make, reducing tension on the wires for a little more sustain, putting it off to the side, not just because we could, but also in a real situation that wouldn't necessarily be the primary sound, and we would want to be able to move back to a primary drum for things later in the piece. So we moved it over to the side, treated it like a Snom, and it worked beautifully. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Zikit system, what it is labeled as on the side where the mechanism is 14, 12, and 10. And the reason for this is because at 14, it's disengaged. At 12 and at 10, it's introducing a secondary bearing edge to the underside of the batter head, giving us a sensation and sound of a smaller drum along with a little bit of muffling, which is super nice. I generally think of it not so much in terms of diameters, but more in terms of a low, medium, high kind of thing, because that's more what I'm looking for when I select it than to be thinking about a specific diameter or a certain sort of drum. Moving on from this first verse and going into the pre-chorus, we engage the Zikit system at the middle setting, or the 12, and start to have a little bit more of a traditional snare drum behavior with some hi-hat and stuff mixed in. Next up, again, in the spirit of experimentation, we decided to involve ourselves with a second snare drum and move this drum into a side snare position, engaging the 10-inch or the highest pitch portion of the Zikit system, and then bringing in our old Acrolite with a big fat snare drum on there to give us the opportunity to have backbeats and ghost notes that sound like different drums, which is something I've heard a lot in music that involves produced and sampled snare sounds, and gives us the opportunity to really have the 2 and 4 jump out in a different way than the rest of the comping. Coming out of that chorus, Ben had a great idea of putting it in a rack tom position and utilizing it in a little bit of a tighter kind of sound and doing more of a 16th note groove on it that's almost a little bit marchy, but not all the way to a traditional march. One of the hippest things to me about the Zikit system and that I utilize often here is that when you engage the 12-inch diameter coming off of the 14, you also get a much more drastically limited set of overtones. So if you want to still have warmth and fatness in the wires, but you just want to get rid of the singing overtones, which sound beautiful for some parts, it's a very quick way to do that without having to add any external muffling or use something else that you brought with you from home. Now, since we've got it up in the rack tom position and we haven't done anything with the snare wires off yet, it seems like a good thing to explore now. We went back and forth with a couple of grooves, and here's what we landed on. This affords us something that is moving into sort of field drum territory, or maybe more of like a tribal kind of thing, but not so dramatic as something like a floor tom, because we're dealing with a lot less sustain and a lot more kind of punchy attack up front. But because of the depth of the drum, there's still a lot of room for the air to move, and the overall sound is beefier than if we had put a standard snare drum up there. In using this drum at this tuning for this portion, we were looking for something that we could use to build through this pre-chorus, which is half as long as the previous one, not a lot of time, to ramp up into this final chorus. And using a floor tom, altering the tuning, these are all options, but we really wanted to see if we could just leave it alone and not adjust anything throughout this whole thing. And because we set that barrier for ourselves, it meant looking for something to play that made it sound cool, rather than starting to turn knobs, turn screws, and get mired up in all that stuff. Finally, we have arrived at chorus number 2, and this is actually from my first take run through when I was learning the tune, feeling it out, and at this point when I was going through, I had gone through a couple of settings in the Zikit by the time I got here, and I felt like at this juncture, I wanted the 12, so I was building through the previous section, turned on the 12, and just dove in. Additionally, you're going to hear in this portion the transition to the bridge where, on the fly, because I felt like it, again, first run through, I switched the snare back to the 14 right before ramping into the bridge because I was feeling like I wanted it to open up really big and reference where we were starting with the big snare at the top, but with a lot of space. So at this point, high energy, open hi-hats, hitting a little bit harder, and the biggest sound that the drum can produce. The net result of all of this is that without adding a lot of stuff to the kit and with instead just looking through what we have here for options, ideas, and inspiration, we came up with a lot of ideas between the two of us that we had no plan for at all. And any one of these would work, frankly, for any section in the tune, which is part of the fun of experimenting with these sorts of things. You don't have to have a recording studio. You don't have to have a ton of microphones. You don't have to have a ton of drums. What you do have to have is excitement and the opportunity to inspire yourself and the will to try things that you're not sure are going to work, just to see if they will. Not worry about it. Not worry about failure, any of that stuff. Just stay excited and use whatever you have. With the Zikit system, it takes a lot of the work of tinkering out of it. If you're in a moment, you're feeling good, you're in the zone, and you just want to snap to something new, you can literally just snap it to something new without having to figure out how you're going to do it. And for me, little twists are enough to inspire me. I don't have to change the whole kit. I don't have to change everything. It might be one cymbal, it might be one drum, or it might be a switch on the side of your head. Now, if you love what you're hearing out of this drum, Reverie Drum Company, at least at the time of filming, has several of these drums built up. The ones that they're stocking are 8 inches deep. This 9 was a little bit of an experiment, but the 8s are not significantly different in behavior and sound and whatnot. And additionally, if by the time you see this, they are out of those, they can absolutely build you whatever your heart's desire and add the Zikit system if you wish. Additionally, you can purchase the Zikit system directly or installed in drums that the company itself has available. There are a lot of options. They're super interesting. We've had a few of them here. If you go back through our old videos, you can see us rifling through all the things that those drums can do as well. Incredibly versatile, super exciting, and just frankly, a beautiful thing to have in your arsenal. In the end, what we're talking about here are tools for creativity, opportunities to get inspired, and whether you love to play blazing music with tons of notes, or you're a pocket guy, or anywhere in between, or both, those players exist too. It's a spectrum. We had a ton of fun with this particular, again, fairly straightforward track that had a lot of room for us to see how we could make it feel by utilizing the creativity and the inspiration that this gave us. And I know I have new ideas, even just from what we did today, and I can't wait to utilize them on my own music. That about wraps it up. If you'd like to learn more, follow the links below. You can learn all about everything that Zikit has to offer, how the device works, what it can do for you and your music. And please also let us know what you think of this format. We've never done anything like this before. It was really fun for us, and putting some of these sounds into context that we've been putting under a microscope for all these years is something that we're excited about. So if you're digging what's going on here, please let us know in the comments and we'll make some more.